Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you're a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more. We hope that you enjoyed today's session, how community sponsors can advocate for refugee-friendly rental properties. That's just sort of a title for many of our audience members who are community sponsors, but this is, as you'll see, relevant for property owners, landlords themselves, and so that's going to be part of the focus as well. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support high-quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Go ahead to the next slide, please. A little housekeeping. As a reminder for everyone joining the call today, there's a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. There will be ample time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so we can try to assist you. Additionally, the presentation, any resources, and a recording will be sent out to everyone following today's webinar. And this brings us to our presenter for today. Go ahead to the next slide. Lynette Pearl. Lynette Pearl is the Senior Associate of Housing for Refugee Housing Solutions. And go ahead to the next slide, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Lynette. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Derek. And again, thank you for hosting me and allowing me to do this presentation. Today, we're going to go to the next slide. Grace. Finding quality long-term newcomers as tenants is not impossible, but there are challenges in the rental process that hinders them from getting leased up. If you're looking to open your doors to newcomers as a landlord or a property manager, there are steps you need to take to make your operations more rental friendly for newcomers. And for training purposes, if I say landlord, that would include property managers, property management companies, and housing providers. So just FYI. This webinar will briefly give an overview. We're going to do an overview of refugee housing solutions and provide ways landlords can make their rental operations newcomer friendly. Even though this presentation is geared towards landlords, resettlement practitioners, sponsors, and volunteers can use this information as an advocacy tool when working with landlords that are willing to make changes that will open housing opportunities for newcomers. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about Refugee Housing Solutions and who we are. Next slide. Refugee Housing Solutions was created to bring housing experts, property owners, key stakeholders, and those working in the refugee resettlement space together in order to discuss best practices and innovative solutions that would increase housing opportunities for newcomers. We are a project of CWS, Church World Service, but we're funded by the Bureau of Population, Refugee, and Migration. With this funding, we are able to provide resources, trainings, and one-on-one technical support to the 9 resettlement agencies and the 280 affiliates throughout the United States. So we serve the whole United States and all the resettlement agencies and their affiliates. We also provide services and support to landlords like we're doing today, this training, housing providers, sponsors, and volunteers. For example, we have a fair housing training for landlords and property managers on July 26th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So go to our website and you can register for that training. And we also have a virtual open house schedule for August 1st at 1 p.m. The reason for this virtual open house, we want to provide more services and talk about the services we provide with RHS. And we also want to educate landlords on the resettlement process while recruiting them as a housing resources for the affiliates. So there's a two-tier thing we're going to do with that virtual open house. We want to educate them, demystify the resettlement process, but also bring them in as a resource for our affiliates and volunteers. Since collaboration and partnerships are vital to addressing the housing crisis, we have a national housing group and we have a regional community of practice. This National Housing Working Group and a regional community of practice, it provides a venue for stakeholders to come up with innovative ideas and best practices. Next slide, Grace. Thank you. So let's talk about the benefits of renting to newcomers. As a landlord, if you know the benefits to renting to a newcomer, it'll make it more easier, and it'll encourage you to change policy and procedures that hinder you from leasing them up. Newcomers, they're hardworking community members. They're eager to build new lives for their families and contribute to society. They can provide evidence of legal status because they are the most vented population. They have with reliable income when employed, and they also have an agency support to help them with tenant landlord issues. So they have that support system. Local resettlement staff walk families through the rental process and act as a support system to not just the newcomer, but to you as a landlord as well. So that's a benefit. It's a win-win situation for you as a landlord and the newcomer, because you as a landlord, you benefit from lower vacancies, shorter vacancy periods, and the opportunity to make a difference in a newcomer life. It's a win for the newcomer because it allows them to become established in the U.S. while building a rental history. Next slide, please. Becoming a landlord with newcomer-friendly rental practices and operation, it is an ongoing process. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. It will take time and will require implementing certain practices and procedures. However, you can get the process started by gradually implementing some of the things we're going to talk about today in your operational practices. You can do things in your screening, your application, your move-in, and rental to start the process going. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. As a landlord, there's documentation you require in your screening process a newcomer will most likely not have. However, a newcomer can utilize other documentation and support services that satisfy your screening requirements during the application process. Unfortunately, a lot of landlords' fears of violating the Fair Housing Act have caused them not to accept alternative documentation. If you are a landlord that generally wants to make your rental operations newcomer friendly, you would need to adjust things in your screening process. If you are a middle or upper management, because I don't know where you're at, if you're a property manager or you're a regional manager or you're a private owner, you should educate yourself, on the fair housing law, so you'll know that this alternative documentation meets your criteria needs. And then also you should advocate. You should advocate with those who can make the decisions to change things in your screening process. Again, if you're a private landlord, you are able to make these changes in the screening process with less difficulty. If you're a private landlord and have concerns about meeting the fair housing requirements, you can refer to your fair housing assistance program in your area. There's one in every area. So if you have any questions, I said reach out to them. Again, this is general information I'm giving you out. I'm not an attorney, but if you have some concerns about changing these things in your screening process, ask an attorney. Next slide, please. Suppose you are a landlord that has only an online application process. This is just another thing you can do to make it more friendly. You might consider changing that up, accepting paper applications for newcomers, because you have some newcomers who are not, I'm not saying all, that's not technology savvy or do not have access to the internet. So that's one thing you can do a simple change to make it more friendly. Instead of online applications, accept paper applications. The important thing for a landlord is to find and secure a good tenant for your property. Having effective communication is key to a good tenant in a landlord relationship. If you have an applicant that cannot speak English fluently, you should provide certain accommodations and services to assist them with the language barrier. Under fair housing laws, it is illegal to discriminate against someone based on their race, color, or national origin. While fair housing laws do not specifically address language barriers, they do state that applicants may not be discriminated against for their national origin. You can offer translation support by allowing applicants to use families to assist with the rental process. Usually it's going to be a trusted family member or a friend. However, I do caution you having a conversation with the minor, because I've had times I would have a minor speak for the adult. Remember, this is a lease, it's a legal binding contract, and talking about contractual matters with minors, that could be a little bit sticky. So just FYI. You can offer an interpretive service. If you're a private landlord, you can possibly utilize a service from a nonprofit agency to assist you with that service, or because they usually can provide it at a low cost. However, if you're a high-end profit property, you consider hiring an hourly interpreter to help you with that. You can use language apps. If your potential applicant can speak some English, but is not completely fluent, you may want to be able to use translation apps if they have access to it, like Google Translate. These apps are not meant to be perfect, just FYI, because sometimes things get lost in translation, just FYI with these apps. But it can help build some type of gap in the communication. Most landlords find that apps are perfect for using to communicate with your tenants after they move in. You can text each other in your native language, in their native language, and then use the app to translate it. But again, sometimes those translations are not perfect, just FYI. It's just a source you could use. Written communication can easily be translated by a friend. We say written communication is good. That friend who speaks the language, both language, sending that service out, the translation out, combined with the written communication is easy to use. Written communication can be easily referenced from time to time when you need to clarify any agreed upon terms or check what the tenant was asking you last month. And it also helps you keep records when you have written communication. As a landlord, you may have some reservations about renting to newcomers that don't speak English very well and think that they will be legally allowed to break a lease because you feel, well, they don't understand the lease. I think they could technically break the lease. No, they can't, because it's still a legal binding contract. That's why it's important in the application process you be flexible when it comes to providing translation support services, because you want to make sure they understand that. And that's just being a good landlord. You know, you want to make sure someone's not signing something they don't understand. So that's just good practices right there as a landlord, providing those type of services. And I think if you provide those type of services, it does make the process friendlier. It's less intimidating for a newcomer. Okay, next slide. Because newcomers are new to the rental process in America, it would be beneficial for a landlord to add orientation in the leasing process. When I was a property manager, I did that, not just for a newcomer, I did that for all my tenants to make sure I was still following the Fair Housing Act. I didn't want to show any preferential treatment to my tenant, because even though tenants, you assume they know something, truly they don't know, but this is something you can use in your process. The orientation can include information that was given during the lease up, such as how to place a work order and who to contact during emergencies. I love cleaning checklists because it tells a tenant how to handle trash, biodegradable items, pet waste, and cleaning products, and can keep them on task with what is acceptable housekeeping habits. So you can hold everybody accountable to that checklist. Once a newcomer leases up, they will have access to appliances and amenities they never used before, or have living habits that are not safe. For example, I had one tenant, they actually used the pool for bathing purposes. So that's just an example. As a landlord, to make their living situation safe, you can give them an overview of what and how to properly use the appliances and create a practice of giving live demonstrations in the unit. I suggest that you do that for all your tenants, because again, you don't want to show treat tenants differently. Also, I would provide an informational sheet that includes how to turn on, for example, to turn on and off an oven after cooking, and the importance of not using the stove as a heater. That was the biggest violation I would find. I would find a lot of my tenants would use their stove as a heater during the winter, and that's a big no-no. They also need to know when and how to use a fire extinguisher. That is very important. You do that in that orientation, and when to call 911 for assistance. And that you partner with the local fire department or the American Red Cross. They're a very good partner to provide additional home fire prevention and safety training. Newcomers are new to the area and will need help finding resources and amenities. So going over what is available during this orientation and providing them with a printout of local resources and directions and nearby amenities and facilities will help them get adjusted to the neighborhood. Moving is stressful and it is overwhelming in normal circumstances. So imagine what a newcomer goes through. They have left everything behind and they're starting fresh and they need a foundation. I provide welcome baskets with much needed household items. It allows you to develop a positive landlord relationship. And also this gesture is tax deductible for the landlord. So that's something you can provide as part of your orientation to make that newcomer to feel welcome into the community. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you can modify in your lease process to make it more newcomer friendly. Due to lease durations and occupancy, early termination requirements, most leases are not friendly, okay, to refugees and newcomers. If you are a landlord and you want to open your doors to newcomers, you need to probably have flexible rental agreements. Year-long leases provide consistent income for you, but it can be a hindrance for an individual that moves city to city or a newcomer that is active in the resettlement process. As a landlord, offering 6-month, month-to-month lease options make your properties more accessible to newcomers. Newcomers who want to find the best city and employment can provide a landlord with rental income for a few months while settling in their new lives comfortably. So having shorter leases can make it more friendly for them to lease up. Because newcomers have no credit or employment history, showing the ability to pay even with a promissory note to pay may not be enough to satisfy your screening criteria. However, you as a landlord can offer the option of a master lease model to a resettlement agency that have the ability to enter into such agreement, okay? For those who do not know, the master lease model is when a nonprofit agency can enter into a long-term lease with the landlord or property management company for control and block of certain amount of rental units. Under this agreement, the nonprofit will assume property management responsibilities for those units and lease those units to newcomers. As a landlord, if you have this option, the master lease option allows you to maintain a regular cash flow while alleviates you of leasing responsibilities because your lease will be with the nonprofit agency. For nonprofits, it's a benefit for us. It will allow you to dictate the terms of the lease as long as it falls under the Fair Housing Act while providing flexibility and additional protections for that newcomer. Another thing you can do to make it friendlier is your early termination clause in place in your lease. I know it's there to protect you as a landlord if a tenant decides to break a lease. It often outlines the circumstances for a lease to be broken and includes specific fees that may be required because some newcomers are still actively looking and may only need temporary housing. Having reasonable termination fees for those who have to break their lease will make your leasing process sensitive to those that are still moving and trying to find their permanent housing. Again, some of these rental practices will not happen overnight, but you got to start somewhere, and it's going to be still an ongoing process that will take some time and require implementations of certain practices and procedures. So with that being said, do we have any questions?
Yeah, I'm gonna go through this here in just a second.
And if I don't have the answer, I will get you the answer.
I also saw someone raise their hand, and So if it was a technical issue, please let us know. But if it was just, I'd like to ask a question or something, please go ahead and include that in the questions tab. So we're gonna go ahead and start answering some questions that have been submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. One of the questions that came up was someone first asking, how long will this webinar last? We usually go for about 45 minutes, give or take, depending on questions. So we still got another 20 minutes or so to do that. And then the other question was just about what RHS stands for. So it's Refugee Housing Solutions. That, can you just share, if you want to share a little bit more about your website or Refugee Housing Solutions. That's what RHS stands for.
Yeah, I think it's on the last, the question page. You have our website there. You can go to our website. We have a slew of resources, trainings, webinars, and on top of that, we're still in our infancy stage, so we're building up on our materials. If you need one-on-one support, technical support, there is a section there where you can request a 20-minute session. If you need additional more time, you can just put it in your notes. So we do our technical assistance every Wednesday, but we prefer that you submit your questions the week before your appointment to give us time to do research and get the materials you need so we can be prepared for that. You can see our webinars, our upcoming webinars we have. We do have 3 that's coming up for landlords. We have our, like I said earlier, we have our virtual open house. Then we have a specific training for fair housing that's geared toward property managers. And then we have a general Fair Housing Act training for those who are victims of domestic violence. So you'll know how to handle a resident what their rights are if they're a victim of domestic violence, so you don't violate that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, got some more questions here. The next question is, are you able to share an example of a master lease?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Able to share that with people?
Yes. One of my positions, we had what we did, we have partnered with a particular major property management company. And with our master lease, without going into many details, we stated with this partnership, if you give us 20 of those units, we're like leasing those up in the master lease. So we're actually leasing those units up. The leases in those 20 units are in our name, and we would turn around and modify our lease to lease it up to our clients. We would give our clients a year to start become independent. And once they got to that year, then that client would turn around and they would have to lease up with that property management company. It gave them opportunity to prove their rental history and their payment history. But ultimately, we were kind of like managing the property lease for that property management company. We were the one held accountable. So for example, if that client did not pay their rent, guess what? We would have to pay the rent for them. If there was any damage done to the units that we did the master lease on, we were responsible for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think perhaps a couple people have more questions about that master lease model.
Oh, that's a training right there.
Yeah,
I can look at it. I can just train a master lease. And the thing I loved about master leases, because it gave at that time, it gave our clients an opportunity to build, like I said, build their rental history, because at that time they had no rental history, no job. It gave them the time to get that stuff together. And if they have regular payments, we would document it. And then we would show that property management company, here, this person has built up their history and their payment. So are you willing now to look at them and put the lease in their name?
Gotcha. Yeah, I just want to read the question I want to make. I think you answered through this, but I just want to double check. So yeah, they're asking for the master lease model. Do you mean that the resettlement agency would sign a lease for multiple apartments to have available for clients? Is that correct? If you could expand on their legal responsibilities.
Yes. And again, that doesn't mean resettlement agencies can go into master leases. So depending on what your organization policies are, some do not want to take on that financial responsibility or risk. But the good thing, the way we did when we decided to do a master lease, we had a sponsor to say, look, if you guys take on the master lease, we have money set aside to help you with damages and rent. So we have raised money ahead of time. So when we knew we were going to that master lease, we had money already set aside for damages and for payments if a client missed a payment.
Gotcha, thank you. Yeah, this next person says they're a community sponsor. Do you have tips about how we can help refugees communicate with landlords to make it more likely that they will rent to them? Any other tips as they look for a new apartment? Lynette, I'll let you kind of add some thoughts too. But one of the things in particular that come to mind for me was offering those demonstrations. So as a community sponsor, if you walk alongside a refugee who you're working with, or other volunteers who are working with a client, to go potentially with them to see the landlord, to talk with potential landlords, and explain the relationship that you all have in terms of providing some additional financial support. Also in terms of just providing, being familiar with their roles and responsibilities as a tenant, how to set their, the heat, and how to conserve electricity, how to clean, the kitchen and things like that. That you will be there as extra support that they may need. I think that can go a long way, as well as offering your local resettlement agency that you may have been paired with, or you've been working with to help match you with a client. Perhaps also has some additional information, one sheets, flyers giving some kind of general information about the types of services and support that refugees are given. How they may qualify for refugee cash assistance, for example, while they're looking for work, and then once they have employment, that they may also have additional resources for them as well. So sort of explaining what, even though they don't have a credit history, even though they don't have a rental history per se, they may come with these other supports, including community supports, and that's an important thing to talk about and explain to a potential landlord.
I would add, Derek, too, if you do your research, like you said, before they go to apply, and a little bit, I do my research on the landlord or the property management company and ask those questions. If they see you're there as that support system and you're asking these questions before they lease up, that lets me know, oh, so this person is not going to go into this legal contract lightly. They have someone who helps explain the process to them. We just had a training a couple of weeks ago about how to read a lease for sponsors, so they can, when they do go to that lease signing with that client, they can explain the lease conditions and look at the lease. And if they see if I see someone has a support system that actually looking through the lease, not doing the check boxes, I'm going to most likely work with that particular client.
Awesome, thank you. Says, thank you for the information. Do you have a slide or one-page sheet about the perks of housing refugees? So yeah, do we have sort of an info sheet or a one-pager as a resource to give people that they can sort of share that information with potential landlords about the benefits of renting to refugees and newcomers?
We have that, Derek. We have that on our website. So we do have like a toolkit if you want to have some something to give them some pointers. We do have on our website why you should rent to refugees. So it's on our Refugee Housing Solutions website.
Awesome, that's fantastic. Let's see. This person says they are supporting a refugee family locally who's renting. They were housed with a landlord that is definitely not so newcomer friendly. we're struggling with getting regular maintenance done, as well as repairs. Is there anything we can do after people are already housed with a landlord that is not newcomer friendly, or just, that it sounds like, they're having some issues with communication with the landlord, making sure that the landlord is following up on repairs and things like that. What kinds of information or suggestions or tips would you offer?
The first thing, I would go to my lease, because that's a legal binding contract. Whatever that landlord signed off to, what their responsibilities in that lease, especially when it comes to the maintenance repair, it should be in that lease. So I would remind that landlord, I know you don't want to burn a relationship, but you have to remind that landlord, just like that client has a responsibility to take care of the unit and pay their rent on time, you as a landlord, you're legally bound to take care of the maintenance of that unit and follow through with the maintenance orders. If it's to a point, if you see that it's a hazard for the family, I hate to say this, but sometimes you have to remind them there's code and compliances. If they're not abiding by, you out of good conscience would have to report them. And you don't want it to get to that point because you don't want to burn a relationship, but you can just remind them they have responsibilities too, because they signed a contract as well.
Yeah, and also I just want to sort of jump in. This is another opportunity to think through, that relationship as a community sponsor, as a volunteer who's working with a client. It might be, you clearly you've made a connection with these clients, that you care about these clients and you want to do what's best for them. And it's really hard to see when it feels like a landlord or someone is not very newcomer friendly, and perhaps it feels like they're taking advantage of the client that you're working with. To remember kind of to keep some of these, it's important to keep these boundaries, to make sure that you're communicating clearly with the client. Make sure that you are trying to empower them to communicate their concerns. Make sure that they are, in fact, their concerns and not just yours, not just like, well, I know what's best, but really kind of talking through with them and encourage them, instead of doing for, can you teach them how? So can you help empower them to communicate that with the help of an interpreter if needed, with your kind of standing in the background, cheering them on kind of thing, to communicate that information to the landlord and to say, we've asked twice, for this sink to be addressed because it's clogging up. If there's something that we need to do better, we'll do better. But if it's something that needs to be fixed, this is your responsibility as the landlord. So anyway, always, I just want to point that out, that we should always be kind of thinking about possibilities for how to implement these, cultural humility, appreciating clients' ability, their agency, their ability to make choices for themselves, and to encourage them to, stand up for themselves, to make things happen if that's something that's needed. So just always want to, whenever there's an opportunity, please think about how we can do that. So Lynette, like you said, they can, or with the client, go to the landlord, look back at the lease, see what what systems are in place. Hopefully in the lease it explains what the process is. And what you said, I think, is really great too, that idea of in the beginning, is there sort of an orientation and those specific things to touch on, like when there's a work order, how do you fill out a work order, and what's the process, so that everyone's really clear about that process up front, and that the help of an interpreter and the help of that community sponsor or volunteer as that extra support is really great. Do you want to add anything else to that, Lynette? Awesome. Let me see what else here. I said it's definitely helpful information. If there's a sample agreement to be shared, that would also be hugely helpful. So I don't know if you have any sort of templates, or, rental agreements that tend to highlight the important things that are sort of newcomer friendly, or if that might be something in the works or something like that.
That could be something in works, but you know what, like I said earlier, if you kind of partner up with a fair housing agency in your area, usually they have partners and access to that. Because again, each state is a little bit different what you can and cannot put in a lease. But that's something that's, definitely it can be in a lease. So I don't want to give specifics because again, each state is different how their lease agreements are. But I would suggest partnering up with an agency that, deals with fair housing, because they can tell you what you can and cannot put in a lease for your state.
Yeah, I would say also as I guess I would add that if you're a community sponsor or volunteer, if you're already working with a local affiliate, which likely you are, even if you are as a group trying to provide housing and sort of doing some of the legwork of finding a landlord and doing that kind of stuff, maybe providing the security deposit, that you could, ask the local affiliate office there for an example of a lease that they have signed in the past, or that they feel comfortable with. Work with their housing person if they do have a housing person, and they might have some specific tips, especially that's more related to your area, your state, and that certain things that might be in it. So I would just add that as another possibility. Another question is it, so I think this is referring to the master lease agreement. Is it considered one lease for all the rentals, or is each rental its own lease? So I guess it's sort of like if a affiliate office or local nonprofit, has a master lease, I guess for a few units. Let's say they have 5 units. Is that considered sort of one lease, or are they 5 separate lease agreements?
It could be depending how you set up your master lease. It varies. With that master lease we had the units that one lease was with the property management company, was under us, and then we had our 5 subleases separately with the actual resident.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And so this is a logistical question about the utilities being in the client's name. So when you're doing sort of a master lease like that, are the utilities put in the client's names, or
no? They were put in our names. Again, each master lease is slightly different depending on how the nonprofit wants to run their master lease. We kept the utilities in our names because we wanted them to not accumulate any utility debt, because after that year was up, we want to make sure they came clean, they can sign their own lease and get utilities in their own name.
Gotcha. Let's see. What are some of the things that co-sponsors should ask the landlord before co-signing of an apartment? Some examples that I can think of are if the landlord will provide written notices to the co-signer as well, but I'm wondering if there are other things that they should ask. So this is, a co-sponsor group who is willing to co-sign a lease if that's what it takes to get, to get leased up for that client. And so they're asking, what are some examples of things to ask, or what kinds of issues might come up with that? So they're, specifically they were thinking of providing some sort of written notice to the co-signer if something happens, if the rent is late, or if they're ready to terminate that lease, or something like that. They want to be in that communication.
I hate to be this broken record. Each state is a little bit different, but when I lived in the state of Illinois, a co-signer was treated like, remember, like you co-sign on a car. If something happens that you don't think that payment and you're the co-signer card, what happens? They notify the co-signer as well, and they fix the co-signer credit. So in the state of Illinois, if you are a co-signer, you're just like you're the tenant. You're co-signing on, you are actually part of that household. So anything happens, you're just as accountable as the person who signed that lease. But again, each state is different. And so those are the questions you ask.
And logistically, and this is why it does get, it can get complicated, and it is a careful consideration before co-signing, and it certainly, for some people, it's just something that they're just not willing to do, but for others, they have the capability of doing that, and are willing to take that risk for the purpose of making sure that this person has an appropriate housing. Sometimes, sometimes there might be an individual person who is willing to sign as a co-signer. Perhaps it's the whole organization. Perhaps it's the church or synagogue or mosque or community group, that's willing to, that has funds in the bank and are willing to sign to say, yeah, we will cover it if anything goes wrong. We're making sure that that we're here to support them in whatever they need. So there are a full range of possibilities.
Yes.
And so, yeah, those are important and sometimes difficult questions logistically. So like I said, that's one of those things. Is it going to require like an individual volunteer / member to be the one to sign, or can the organization, church, synagogue, mosque, community group of some kind, are they able to sign documents on the behalf of that group? And will the landlord accept that as a co-signer?
And that's the one thing, like, you need to ask, if I co-sign on this this lease, am I going to be treated like the person who's the primary? And if they say yes, that means you're held financially responsible just like that person who signed. So yes, and then with organizations, you usually have a designated person to be that co-signer, but even though that person is a designated person, the organization is still responsible.
Correct. Yep, that makes sense. We do have another minute or two if needed. I don't so far. There you go. So you might have another question or two. Give me a second. Sorry, I missed it. Is whether or not a co-signer is treated the same as the tenant up to state law, or can a landlord decide how the co-signer will be treated effective?
It meets the state guidelines.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. So within each state, a landlord can, has whatever flexibility that's allowed within that state.
With the state guidelines, yeah.
Gotcha.
The state criteria.
State criteria. Gotcha. Okay. All right. And I think that's it. And we're pretty much right at time. So I want to thank you, Lynette, again for being here. Thanks really to everyone who has joined and asked interesting questions and was engaged today. Thanks to everyone for attending today's RWC Lunch and Learn. If you have any other questions, please contact info@refugeewelcome.org. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, as well as descriptions of more upcoming RWC Lunch and Learns. On behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day. Thank you again, Lynette. Take care.